Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and joining me on the line today, we have a special guest. He will be defending his Bellator Lightweight Championship at Bellator NYC. He is Iron Michael Chandler. And Michael, thanks for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Right off the bat here, Michael, I want to get to talking about fighting in Madison Square Garden. Obviously, it just happened that MMA was legalized in New York late last year, giving yourself and many other fighters a chance to finally fight in an arena such as Madison Square Garden. Finally get to do that here coming up this weekend. That's got to be quite an honor and quite a thing for your career to say at least once you fought in Madison Square Garden, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think there's a couple things you want to do as a fighter, and you want to get big fights, you want to win world titles, and you want to fight on the biggest stages you possibly can. Because as this sport grows, it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it doesn't get any bigger than Madison Square Garden. So whenever this fight got announced, whenever they told me I was going to be on this card, it was a huge honor. And it's been a couple months in the making, and now we've gone through a whole training camp, and now it's fight week, so it's time to buckle down and focus on the task at hand. But I think it's really going to settle in, really going to sink in after the fight is over, after I've won, after I've gotten my hand raised. That was a cool experience, and it'll be an experience that I can talk to my kids about and tell my grandchildren that, Grandpa fought at Madison Square Garden, the world's most iconic arena, the same place that Mike Tyson did, the same place that Muhammad Ali did. So it's exciting.
Now, have you already got to walk through the arena? And if so, just what are your feelings just walking through and, kind of feeling the history of that building?
I have not done it yet here this week. But I did go, my wife and I were here for a press conference and press tour a couple months ago, and we went to a Knicks game, and there's something different about that arena. It's so cool. The cool thing is they've done a good job of preserving the history of it, and they have a bunch of pictures up, and they have pictures of all the old fights and Tyson and Ali Frazier and all of the history, which is really cool, because that's the main draw of that building. It's so old, and it's so full of memories, and they do a good job of reminding you of that. So you can walk through, and it's almost basically like a museum. It's a museum of sports past, and it's really, really cool, and man, it's just, there's a different energy about it. There's a different feel in the air when you're in Madison Square Garden. It was different because it was a basketball game that we were at, but as soon as the lights and the cage and the that combat sports arena gets constructed, it's going to literally turn into that modern day Coliseum, and it's cool, man. It's exciting, and I'm extremely fortunate to be a part of it, and I'm excited to go out there and literally steal the show.
Your opponent here for Bellator NYC is Brent Primus. A lot of people don't know about Brent Primus. 7-0 in his career, has been fighting for Bellator since 2013, has won every single fight put in front of him so far. Most recently defeated Guilherme Santos, if I said that correctly, back in April of last year. What do you feel Brent Primus brings to the table, and where are you going to have to look out for come Saturday night?
Primus is pretty solid everywhere, but he's nothing I haven't seen before. He's solid on the ground. He's solid on his feet. He's got good cardio. He likes to tie you up and get you up against the cage, and he really just kind of wants to make it a kind of an ugly fight and kind of close that distance. He doesn't like to be at distance, and I'm very, very, very dangerous at distance. I can come in and come out of that range and in and out of the pocket faster than anybody in the world, and I have that confidence. So to be able to go out there and put my hands on him pretty quick, immediately instill fear in his eyes, in his heart, and kind of see what happens with the fight, whether it materializes more on the feet or on the ground. But he's solid everywhere. Have a ton of respect for him. he's undefeated. He hasn't tasted defeat yet, so his confidence is sky high. He wants to come in and dethrone the champion in the world's most iconic arena. He's got a phenomenal opportunity ahead of him. He's got a phenomenal opportunity that has been presented, and we'll see how he reacts. We'll see how he does under the bright lights. We'll see. I've been here before. I've fought for this world title 9 times, and I've either fought or defended for this title 9 times, and I've fought some of the greatest lightweights in the history of mixed martial arts now. So the experience is on my side. The hard work, the discipline, living my life right, all of that is on my side, and I'm going to go out there and prove that. It doesn't matter whether I'm fighting Brent Primus or or anybody else in the entire world. I'm going to focus on myself. I'm going to focus on myself going out there and performing like I know I can perform, and outperforming my previous self, and that's really all I can ask for. And I'm expecting nothing more or nothing less than fireworks to go off on Saturday night and leave with a win.
Now, were you surprised that Brent Primus was your option here for Bellator NYC? Did you think that you might get a rematch against Ben Henderson or perhaps some of the other lightweights in Bellator's division?
No, I think Ben Henderson's hurt. I know he got a knee surgery, so I think he's hurt. And Bellator just needs to sign some more guys. Or we're gonna have some issues moving forward with the division. But I guess it's tough though when I literally knock down every single person they put in front of me though. So I get it. But they need to focus on signing more guys in the lightweight division. If not, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm gonna have to move up to welterweight or look elsewhere. So we'll see what happens.
Now, I saw on Twitter that it looks like you're going to be moving to Nashville, Tennessee soon, and I was wondering what prompted the move to Nashville. I love the city personally, and I guess what was the reason for moving over there?
Yeah, it's a cool city. It's my wife and I's favorite city. We travel a lot, and we probably traveled to Nashville 8 times. And I was training. I moved to San Diego. I was training in San Diego for about 2 years, and then kind of things changed there. And I've done my last 3 or 4 training camps outside of San Diego. So there's really no reason for us to be living in San Diego. I don't train there. So we started looking around and kind of looked at our options, and Nashville, Tennessee just seemed like a cool fit for us. It's a young, cool, growing city. It's got a phenomenal country music scene, obviously. It's green, and it's rolling hills, and it's trees, and it's big pastures, and very, very very similar to the way that we grew up. And my wife's from Columbia, Missouri, where University of Missouri is, and I'm from south of St. Louis, Missouri, more of a rural, Midwestern kind of state look, So that's where my heart has always been, in the Midwest, and I'm excited to get back to Nashville, plant some roots. Our house, we're building a house. Our house will be done August 1st, and then we're going to focus on winning more fights and building a beautiful little family.
He is Michael Chandler. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Michael Chandler MMA, or Mike Chandler MMA. And Mike, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it and look forward to your fight at Bellator NYC this Saturday on pay-per-view.
You got it. Thank you.
Once again, that was Bellator lightweight champion Michael Chandler right here on Beyond the Cage.
Once again, thank you to Michael Chandler for coming on the program. Really appreciate him coming on the show and talking about his fight coming up this weekend at Bellator NYC, only on pay-per-view, Saturday, June 24th. From Madison Square Garden in NYC. Now, before I get to talking about the main card there at Bellator NYC, before that, they're actually doing Bellator 180, which will serve as a lead-in to the pay-per-view broadcast starting at 10 p.m. Eastern. 4 fights will be shown on the main card for Bellator 180, again, still coming from Madison Square Garden. And I think this whole event is really awesome that what Bellator is doing, and they're making it a huge night with a huge undercard. It's definitely the biggest night in Bellator history, and they're doing it in the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden. And I think this is a great idea. And it almost makes you think, like, what's Bellator going to do for, like, Bellator 200? Because this is such a huge event. I don't know. Not saying they can't top it, but it's going to be tough to top unless the fights don't deliver, which, of course, Bellator and my hope and most mixed martial arts fans' hope is that it does deliver their Saturday night from Madison Square Garden. Once again, for everyone joining me, my name is Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. You can also like Beyond the Cage on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. And, of course, subscribe to the show right here on YouTube, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. And if you're on the go, don't have time or can't watch the video version, don't want to get distracted by video, you can also check out the audio versions of the show on iTunes or Google Play. And the Michael Chandler interview, if you want to hear just that, is uploaded to my SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Jim Graham. So, all right, let's get to Bellator 180. As I said, opening up the broadcast there on Spike TV. That's going to start at 8 p.m. Eastern. And looking at this main card here, it's going to start first in the female flyweight division as Heather Hardy will take on Alice Yeager. For those of you who don't know who Heather Hardy is, some of you may not, she is actually a champion boxer who is making the transition to mixed martial arts, much like Holly Holm. She was hoping to find some success here in mixed martial arts, starting here with Bellator, and she was born in 1982, if anyone was wondering, and she is currently the WBC International Female Super Bantamweight Champion. She is also from Brooklyn, so she'll be fighting right here in her home in New York. Now 35, she has boxed since 2005. Overall, in her career, she is 20-0, has never lost a professional boxing bout, does have one no contest on her record, and 4 knockouts so far in boxing, and again, has been doing that for 12 years. And this should be interesting. Obviously, Alice Yeager has 9 fights experience in mixed martial arts to Heather Hardy. And obviously with Hardy coming from a boxing background, have been doing that for a very long time, it's going to be interesting how she deals with obviously any sort of takedowns or grappling acts. And I don't know. Well, we shall see. Alice Yeager, again, 4-5 in her mixed martial arts career. Has only been finished just once. She has fought previously for Bellator. That was back in January of this year, where she lost to Jessica Middleton. That actually snapped a two-fight winning streak that she had. Her most notable win is a win over Shannon Sin. That was back at SCL Heat in July of 2014, and also did fight Rebecca Ruth, who Bellator fans maybe know, did get knocked out by Ruth in the 3rd round of Shamrock FC Fuel back in September of 2015. So, excuse me, someone that, obviously, like I said, has some experience, is a little older, 38 years old, only 1 knockout to her credit, 3 decision victories of there, but obviously, you got to believe that she does not want anything to do standing with Heather Hardy. And even though she doesn't have a lot of knockouts in her boxing career, you got to believe her fighting with 4-ounce gloves is going to be a big boon to her. And obviously, you have to give her the advantage there in the stand-up department. It's just going to be really how she's going to deal with fighting in a cage. Obviously, Bellator's cage is a complete circle. She's going to be used to cutting angles. Obviously, the surface is going to be a little bit different. It's her debut. She's doing it in Madison Square Garden on a huge platform like this. It'll be interesting if, obviously, she is a former boxing champion, but still, I don't think she's ever fought on a stage quite like this. It should be interesting how she takes on Alice Yeager here, and I'm really excited for her debut. Bellator obviously has put together a really solid female flyweight division as of right now. That may change with the UFC looking to get into that market. But as of right now, it's a great division. They're looking to crown a champion. Heather Hardy is someone that could factor in that with a very nice debut here, and obviously a star that they're going to want to look to push, and definitely very intriguing, and that's the fight that's going to kick off the main card here for Bellator 180 on Spike TV. Then we're going to get Neiman Gracie against Dave Marfon. if I said that correctly. Marfan is 5-2. Neiman Gracie is 5-0. They're both listed at a weight of 176 pounds, so I don't know if this is going to be fought at welterweight or this catch weight of 176, so that is something to look out for. Again, this is all according to Bellator's website that I'm getting that weight information. Obviously, Gracie, being a Gracie, should have a very good submission game. I've never heard of Marfan before this matchup. 5-2 is his record, so he definitely has some experience. And I don't know, we'll see. I'm not really sure what to get here. I'm going to give you some brief background on both of these gentlemen. As I mentioned, Neiman Gracie 5-0, Dave Marfan 5-2. Gracie 4 of 5 wins by submission, no surprise there. Has pretty much fought for all big-time organizations. His first 2 fights were professional fights, were in World Series of Fighting, won both those by submission. Has since transitioned to Bellator in February of 2015. Has so far won all his 3 fights, most recently a first-round submission victory over Rudy Bears back at Bellator 163, training specifically right out of the Renzo Gracie Academy right there in New York. So he should be feeling right at home there fighting at Madison Square Garden. And Dave Marfan, as I mentioned, 5-2, his only 2 losses by knockout, and most recently lost in CFFC 63, getting knocked out in the 3rd round. That snapped a 2-fight losing streak. Mostly has fought for CFFC. Hails originally from New Hartford, Connecticut, so he should have a lot of friends and family there in attendance at Bellator 180. And obviously, if you're Marfan, you probably want to try to keep this thing standing and stay away from the grappling prowess of Neiman Gracie. Looking at the next fight there on the Bellator 180 undercard, this is a very exciting matchup here in the featherweight division. Chinzo Machida against James Gallagher. Boy, you have a very excellent grappling practitioner in James Gallagher, who is so far 6-0, the young man from Ireland, taking on the brother of former UFC champion Chinzo Machida, who doesn't have quite the experience, got into MMA a little later than his brother Lyoto. 5-2 is his record to 6-0 for Gallagher. Chinzo started fighting in mixed martial arts in 2005, but took a little bit of a break after going 1-1 between 2005 and 2006. Returned to MMA briefly in 2010, losing a fight, and then did not fight again for 3 years. Returned actually to RFA in 2013, debuting with a flying knee knockout win over a very solid competitor in Brian Wood. Won again in RFA over Dmitry Gerzimov at RFA 15. Then didn't fight for about 2 years before making his Bellator debut, which so far he has been nothing short of fantastic fighting for Bellator, winning both fights by knockout, knocking out Mario Navarro in August of 2016 at Bellator 160, and then defeating Jamar Ocampo at Bellator 170, knocking him out in the 3rd round earlier this year. And obviously has that karate background with the Machidas, using that wide stance, in and out movement. Obviously has shown tremendous power. Despite being 40 years old, he still has shown a lot of power in this weight class. And obviously, I think really that might be the biggest difference in this thing is, even though he has some good speed and hand movement, that being Machida, obviously you're taking on such a youthful kid here in James Gallagher, who I think is so quick to come inside and get the takedown. That's really going to be the story of this. Is at least Lyoto has been hard to take down because of that wide stance. I don't think Chinzo will be quite the same. Excuse me. And that's really what I'm going to have to look for here is kind of the in and out movement of the striking. Will that negate the takedowns of the 20-year-old Irishman? And if they do, I'm not sure if at this stage in his career Gallagher is quite at a level to hang standing up wise with Machida. The longer this stays at range and on the feet, the more it favors Chinzo Machida. But if Gallagher can figure things out, get in close, get into the clinch, and obviously if he can get a takedown, not saying Machida has no jiu-jitsu skills, but that much favors James Gallagher, who has so far shown tremendous grappling skills and has won several European grappling tournaments. So that's where he's going to feel more at home than standing at range and trying to outpoint or certainly try to figure out the puzzle there of Shinzo Machida. And the main event and like I said, super excited about that fight. Main event, and that will be in the featherweight division, if anyone was wondering. I know James Gallagher has also said he's thought about fighting at bantamweight. This fight will be at featherweight. Main event of Bellator 180, before we get to the pay-per-view main card, is for the light heavyweight championship of Bellator, and that's going to be a rematch between Phil Davis and Ryan Bader. Ryan Bader will be making his Bellator debut after fighting exclusively for the UFC since winning the Ultimate Fighter in 2008. This will be his first fight not in the UFC in nearly 10 years. He is currently riding a 2-fight win streak and overall has won 7 out of his last 8 bouts. Most recently knocked out Little Nog at UFC Fight Night 100 back in November of last year. After that fight, became a free agent, and the UFC didn't look like they wanted to re-sign the 34-year-old native of Tempe, Arizona, and thus he went to Bellator. And much like his counterpart, Phil Davis, much the same, the UFC didn't really want to re-sign him, and it's funny, it was right after his loss to Ryan Bader in January of 15. That was on the card UFC on Fox 14. I believe it was the co-main event of Rumble Johnson against Alexander Gustafsson. And since that point in time where Phil Davis lost that split decision, he has won 4 straight, beating some solid guys, Emmanuel Newton, Francis Carmel, King Mo, and Liam McGarry, all en route to winning the Bellator Light Heavyweight Championship, and that was over Liam McGarry there at Bellator 163 in November of 2016. Since then, Phil Davis was kind of sitting back, kind of really waiting for a contender to emerge. I really thought, King Mo had fought a couple times. He fought Mirko Krokop in the Risen Grand Prix tournament. He had that fight against Ishii, the fight against Rampage Jackson. So I think that was a possible contender. But then Ryan Bader said he wanted to really fight King Mo, and him really kind of shellacking Liam McGarry was kind of going to force things to wait. King Mo, a little banged up, wouldn't be ready to go here for Bellator 180, so instead they give Ryan Bader Phil Davis wanting to be on the Bellator NYC card, and with good reason considering all the fights and people that were fighting on that card. Why not get a part of that even on the undercard? So Phil Davis, it's weird to say the champion stepped up to take a fight on somewhat of a, not a super short notice, but the champion did step up. He's going to try to, and I think it's because obviously he had lost to Ryan Bader previously, so the champion Phil Davis stepping up to make this fight for the championship. And going back to their fight in January 2015, it was not a very good fight. It was probably one of the worst fights you'll ever see in any mixed martial arts organization. I think both fighters would agree that it was not a very great contest. Neither really shined in that performance, and probably obviously the main reason the UFC got rid of Phil Davis, they were really happy with that fight, and obviously you can see why not that much longer afterwards they ended up getting rid of Ryan Bader. That fight was just not very good, and at the time I think letting go of Phil Davis I think was interesting. I mean, at the time Phil Davis was only 30 years old. I still think had a lot of potential, was still learning the sport, especially in the stand-up game. And for Ryan Bader, I kind of get it. He had lost to most of the top guys in the division, and is 34 years old, would have probably taken a good deal amount of money, building up with the veteran status, and realistically he probably wasn't going to beat Daniel Cormier. He had already fought Jones and lost. This was several years ago, so and Alexander Gustafsson had already lost to Rumble Johnson. Now he never fought Gustafsson, but I don't think that fight would have went well for him, and he already had lost to Glover Teixeira, another one of the top guys. I don't mind the decision to let him go, and obviously, it works for Bellator. They get to build up one of their weaker divisions in the process and bring some solid matchups to the table, obviously, with McGarry and King Mo and Linton Vassell out there in the light heavyweight division. Ryan Bader certainly adds some credibility to that division. And I don't know if we're going to see what we saw in 2005 or 2005 and 2015, but hopefully it's whatever we see. I just hope it's somewhat entertaining. That's somewhat of a semblance, and obviously this one's scheduled for 25, so hopefully something happens. I think both wrestling is very good by both. I'd give a slight edge to Phil Davis. I also think he's still more of a wrestler at this stage. I would say Ryan Bader is probably a little better of the stand-up fighter and definitely has way more power than the two. Phil Davis only has 3 knockout victories of his 17 victories, whereas Ryan Bader has 8 knockout victories to his credit of 22 victories. So I think from that standpoint, Bader has a little more of a finishing factor. Phil Davis is pretty solid with submissions. Ryan Bader's not a guy that gets submitted very often. Of his 5 losses, I'm not sure if Bader's ever been submitted. Let's see. He's only been submitted twice, and he has not been submitted since losing. Actually, they were both back-to-back fights, which is crazy. He got submitted twice in 2011 to John Jones and Tito Ortiz. So he has not been submitted before that and has not been submitted after that. So despite that, I think it's going to be tough to submit Ryan Bader for Phil Davis, and I got to give a slight edge to Ryan Bader. Unless Phil Davis has strongly improved in his stand-up game, which so far in Bellator, we haven't really seen him really evolve that much in the 2 years being in Bellator, so it's hard for me to say, oh, Phil Davis is now a tremendous stand-up fighter. I don't know what he's been doing here these last 8 months, but if it's been working on the stand-up, maybe we'll see the next evolution of Phil Davis, and we'll see it come out on Bellator 180. Let's get to the pay-per-view portion of the card, which kicks off, as a lot of people may or may not know, with a very peculiar fight, as Aaron Pico will take on Zach Freeman. Freeman is 8-2 in his career, and Aaron Pico will be making his professional debut. Now, the reason that's curious is because, obviously, you saw the fights I just mentioned on the undercard on Bellator 180. And obviously, Aaron Pico is a guy making his professional debut. Very interesting. For those of you who don't know Aaron Pico, born in 1996, he was an American freestyle wrestler, originally from California. And he has done folk style, freestyle, and Greco-Roman. He's won the U.S. National Championship in all 3 of those styles. He has also wrestled, I should say, for the World Cadet Championships in wrestling as well. And also, he's fighting in the lightweight division. He's just 20 years old, and obviously has been very good on the international scene. He also was a National Junior Golden Gloves champion in 2009, so he does have a little stand-up there. And also he has done some pancration in the Ukraine. He won actually the Golden Cup for European pancration in 2010, and this was also during the same time that he won both California State championships in pancration and boxing as well. So obviously this is a guy who has a very decent list of accomplishments in pancration, boxing, and wrestling, but has not put that together professionally in mixed martial arts. And even though he is a blue chip prospect, a lot of people were interested and maybe intrigued that Bellator signed him to such a long-term deal in November of 2014, and he's already been endorsed by Nike as of April 2014. So a lot of people are putting a lot of hype into this kid, who again has mainly fought at 145 as a wrestler. He'll be moving up to 155 for this bout here, kicking off the pay-per-view main card. And Zach Freeman, interesting guy to make his debut against. Freeman is a guy that obviously, again, has 10 fights experience in mixed martial arts. He's a relatively big lightweight at 6 foot tall, whereas Pico checks in at just 5'7". Obviously, probably moving down to featherweight might be in his future coming up soon. His last couple fights is when he's lost most recently to Jake Lindsay and Thiago Moises. The loss to Lindsay was in Titan, and his most recent victory, he hasn't won in about 2 years. He defeated Zach Kelly at Rumble Time Promotions, and has not fought since September of last year. So it's not like this guy is a world beater by any stretch of the imagination, but this is a guy who obviously has some experience, and obviously does have some grappling experience, has won 5 of his 8 victories by submission. And so Aaron Pico, obviously you look to think he's probably going to try to take down Zach Freeman, and getting in those positions, how's he going to deal with the submissions? How's he going to deal with the gloves? How's he going to deal actually getting punched in the face for the first time? How's he going to deal with the crowd? I mean, kicking off the biggest card ever in Bellator history. That's got to be some pressure. Obviously signed to the big deal, the Nike deal. How's he going to deal all with that coming into a fight against Zach Freeman? And even though Zach Freeman is the more experienced guy, probably should be favored in this matchup, a lot of people, they're going to be hyping up Aaron Pico. So the hype's on him right now to go in there and not only perform, but get a win. That's what Bellator wants. So Zach Freeman looking to play spoiler there, kicking off Bellator NYC. And I'm intrigued how Pico looks and how he performs, and whether or not this kid is the real deal at just 20 years old, and if Bellator is justified, and Nike, I guess, is justified in spending a lot of money on this young man. And even though he is 20, I'm not saying if he loses his career's done or anything like that, but making a successful debut and getting a win, obviously it would be something he wants and something Bellator wants desperately as well. Looking at the next fight here at Bellator NYC, it's going to kick off back-to-back championship fights. We're going to start with the guy I talked to earlier in the show, Michael Chandler against Brent Primus. Didn't sound scared or really worried about what Brent Primus brings to the table, and no offense to Mr. Primus, he has a solid record there at 7-0. But nothing so far in Brent Primus' career has made me think that he can beat somebody the caliber of Michael Chandler. Now, he does have a nice victory over Derek Anderson in August of 2015, winning a split decision. But really, other than that, and yeah, he's finished a lot of guys, but his last fight, split decision, I didn't think looked that great there against Santos, going back to Bellator 153. Wasn't a very memorable performance, and he did mention, Ben Henderson's hurt. Some of the other guys are on losses, so kind of the thing falls to Brent Primus. But I don't know. I'm not sure if Brent Primus really stands much a chance. I think, as Michael Chandler said, he kind of wants to hold on to. He kind of wants it in close, maybe make it a little of a grinding affair, and I think that's really his only chance to win, is really try to wear on Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler's not overly big in terms of height, size 155 or standing at 5'8". Brent Primus standing at 5'10", so he should have a little bit of a height and reach advantage there against the champion. And really, as Michael said, I think that is his best chance to really try to wear out, make him carry his weight, make it in close, make Michael Chandler work for those positions to get out to try to strike at range. As Michael Chandler said in the interview, he believes he's the better fighter at range, and I do believe that as well. He's also the more powerful fighter and also has a lot more finishing skills, as he's finished 13 of his 16 career victories with 7 knockouts and 6 submissions. So I think if anybody's going to finish this fight, more likely it's going to be Chandler. So look for Primus to really try to tie up Michael Chandler, frustrate the champion. And if he can do, the thing is, I think he can do that, but can he do it for 25 minutes? He's never been in the cage for that amount of time before, nor has I think he's even been scheduled for that amount of time. And that obviously favors the champion Michael Chandler, who's gone 5 rounds several times in his career, most recently his last fight there against Ben Henderson. He went to the 5th round, I believe, 2 times against Eddie Alvarez, went to the 4th round against Eddie Alvarez a few times, and obviously went to the 4th and 5th round against Will Brooks both times. So this is a guy that a lot of people knock on his conditioning, but this is a guy who's gone 5 rounds several times, and I really think, other than those Will Brooks fights, has looked really solid in the process. I think just Will Brooks was on a roll and just, was the better conditioned athlete at the times in the fight, and that made a really big difference, and obviously was a tough guy to finish. And I think Brent Primus is going to have a very tough time dealing with that, and obviously dealing with the power. I mean, Michael Chandler has some very crazy power, and I'm not sure if Brent Primus has seen or felt anybody that hits like that before either. Getting to the next fight here at Bellator NYC, Lorenz Larkin against Douglas Lima for the welterweight championship. However, I think this one's going to be a lot closer than the other title fight. Very tough fight to pick here. Douglas Lima is a very dynamic striker. He's huge for this weight class, standing at 6'1". I mean, he's beaten a guy by leg kicks. He is a tremendous finisher. He has finished 24 of his 28 wins so far in his career. And after his loss to Ben Askren, he has won 7 out of his last 8 fights, the only loss coming to Andrei Korzhakov, a fight that, again, he was not 100% for, and it definitely showed as he performed much better in the rematch, knocking out Korzhakov in the 3rd round there in Israel at Bellator 164 for a fantastic performance. And also I thought looked pretty solid against Paul Daly as well, the fight before at Bellator 158. Larkin making his Bellator debut. 11 of his 18 victories are by knockouts. Also has 7 decision victories to his credit. Has only been finished once in his career, and that was at 185 pounds to Costa Falopu. That was back in 2014. And actually, Lorenz Larkin has fought as big as 205 pounds, believe it or not, back in Strikeforce. He actually fought King Mo, believe it or not, before eventually working his way down to 170 pounds. And this is a guy who transitioned from Strikeforce, a pretty solid career, having a win over Robbie Lawler being his biggest victory. Debuted in April of 2014, had a couple fights at 185 pounds, only went 2-4 at 185 with, actually only went 1-4 at 185 pounds, fighting some really tough guys, Francis Carmon, Brad Tavares, Costa Falopu, and Derek Brunson, only beating Chris Camozzi in that span of 5 fights. Then transitioned to 170, taking on John Howard, knocking him out in the first round, then knocking out Santiago Ponzinibbio. Following that, did have a close fight and lost to Albert Tumov, but since then rebounded, defeating Jorge Masvidal and then having an impressive performance, knocking out Neil Magny at UFC 202. Was then a free agent afterwards. The UFC decided to let him go, and he's going to maybe make the UFC pay a little bit here. Obviously, he was a guy that was very outspoken about the Reebok deal and sponsorship, so he gets the opportunity to do that here at Bellator 180. And, all right, all that background, all this, get to the fight breakdown. I think both are very technically sound strikers. I think the thing is, Lorenz Larkin probably has a little bit faster hands than Douglas Lima. I'm going to really be looking for his footwork and in-and-out movement. I think that's going to be key because Douglas Lima is a very big and long welterweight. He's going to have the height advantage and the reach advantage as well. With those leg kicks, that's going to be the primary weapon of Douglas Lima, especially with a fighter that's going to be moving quick in and out, and that's usually his primary weapon. So I'm going to look to see how Larkin can defend those leg kicks, and obviously how he's going to be going in the pocket, because when he's moving in, he's going to have to get out quickly because Douglas Lima hits very hard and is maybe just a bit slower, so it's not somebody that's super slow just because he's a bigger guy. That's really going to look for. Takedown-wise, I don't look for Douglas Lima to look for a takedown. If it's there, maybe he'll take it, but I think primarily he's going to stand at the feet, keep range. It's really going to be what Larkin's going to do, because if those leg kicks are coming, he's going to have to make an adjustment if he doesn't defend them properly in the first place. So Larkin, I could see really try to push up close, get in close for a takedown, force some clinching, force some throws, force some knees, force some elbows, and I really think that's probably going to be his strategy, possibly kind of moving early on. I think he's going to have a feeling out process to see how he's going to be moving in and out and how Lima is throwing with the leg kicks and speed and what he's presenting on Saturday. And if Larkin finds success early with the stand-up, maybe he abandons trying to take him down altogether. But if things go south for Larkin, he's going to have to look for the takedown. As far as Lima goes, like I said, he doesn't have a huge takedown game, does have some decent submissions mainly off his back. So if things aren't going Lima's way, if he's not timing there, maybe he possibly pulls guard, maybe he goes for the takedown, but you know that's got to be very desperate for Lima to abandon trying to strike with somebody if he's going for takedown. So very intrigued by this fight. I think it could go the distance, but I have a feeling that both these guys have some decent power in their hands. I actually think we may see a knockout, possibly 3rd or 4th round. And I think this is actually going to start off technical, then maybe get a little more brawler-esque or a little more hits as both guys settle into the rhythm. And I think we're going to see a fantastic welterweight championship fight there at Bellator NYC. Co-main event of the evening, heavyweight division, Fedor Emelianenko will be taking on Matt Mitrione. This fight was supposed to happen earlier this year. Ended up getting canceled as Matt Mitrione was sick just hours before this fight. They had to pull it. It was the main event earlier this year in San Jose. Gonna try to do it again here at Bellator 180. This is very difficult because Fedor is obviously older in his career. This will be his 41st professional bout, 36-4 so far, and obviously does not take the hits as well as he used to. Matt Mitrione, it's funny. You think is this like youthful guy and doesn't have as much experience and stuff, but Matt Mitrione is actually only a few years older than Fedor, so there's not like a huge gap in age. It's just the fact that Fedor has so much more miles on him as a mixed martial artist, as he's been fighting professionally since 2000, so he's been fighting professionally for 17 years. And actually, after having that really tough span there between 2010 and 2011, where he lost 3 straight fights in a row to Verdum, Bigfoot Silva, and Dan Henderson, he has since won his last 5 fights. That's with a retirement there in between, defeating the likes of Jeff Munson, Sato Ishii, Pedro Hizo, the Jadu Singh fight. I think a lot of people can kind of rough, and then actually narrowly defeated Fabio Maldonado in his most recent fight for EFN in June of 2016. So it's been nearly a year since Fedor has actually been fighting. And another thing to also factor in is Fedor never has done very well fighting in a cage. Most of his fights and success have come fighting in a ring, so I think that is a factor here. Obviously, Fedor has never been an overly big heavyweight, standing only at 6 foot and 223 pounds, officially listed as probably would weigh him. Whereas Mitrione, again, 2 years younger, but again, only 16 professional fights, has a lot of power. 10 of his 11 victories are by knockouts. You add in Fedor's knockouts, he has 11 to his credit too, but much more of a submission stylist, 17 of 36 wins by submission. And I really think that's going to be the key. If it gets in close, still have to favor Fedor in those grappling situations, and if it goes to the ground, I don't see Mitrione giving Fedor a lot of problems, but it's getting to the ground that could be a problem for Fedor. Again, a little older, a little slower, taking on a guy who is a big and strong heavyweight, could possibly put in some problems there. You also add in the fact that Mitrione, anytime he's taking on someone decent, he has not fared very well. He's lost to anyone that's elite or near elite competition, having lost to Chet Congo, Roy Nelson, Brendan Shaw, Ben Rothwell, and Travis Brown. Biggest victory of his career, he did have 3 straight victories. These are probably the biggest of his career. You can kind of go back and forth as to which one was bigger, as he knocked out Sean Jordan, Derek Lewis, and Gabriel Gonzalez in 3 straight fights, all first-round knockouts. Probably the biggest stretch of his career, and best stretch of his career, and has since gone 2-2 since, has fought twice in Bellator, winning both fights by knockout. Obviously, he got hurt against Semu Nufata, but able to come back, win that fight. And then against Ole Thompson, I didn't really think he looked that great against the guy he should have beat easily. Yeah, he got the knockout victory, but I didn't think he looked that great in the process, and it really gives me pause to pick him fighting against Fedor, even though it's a much older Fedor. It's not the same guy we remember who hadn't lost for, had never lost or had only lost once, up until 2010. And, man, I don't know. I think we're going to see a finish. I think it's probably going to come first or second round. And I still think I got to favor Fedor. I got to finish the experience and just being able, even though this is a huge stage, Fedor, I don't think is going to be intimidated by this at all. Is not going to be intimidated by Matt Mitrione. And I really think that he's going to get the victory despite the size difference that Mitrione will have over the former Pride champion. Getting to the main event of Bellator NYC, a grudge match between Chael Sonnen and Wanderlei Silva, the former UFC title challenger and, of course, the former Pride welterweight champion in Wanderlei Silva. These two will finally meet, a rivalry that has been years in the making. Obviously, started initially when these two were set to coach against each other on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. Obviously, there was both of those guys went through some problems with performance-enhancing substances, testosterone, and the like, which actually saw Vanderlei Silva get a huge ban from the Nevada Athletic Commission there before eventually it was kind of repealed, and Vanderlei did the testing and all the process, and Chael Sonnen took his suspension and went through the steps to go through that and obviously come back and kind of actually briefly retired there after that whole situation, and following his loss there to Rashad Evans in November 2013, did come back and made his Bellator debut early this year, losing to Tito Ortiz. I don't really hold a lot of stock in that. Obviously, Tito, a much bigger fighter at 205 pounds than Chael was, definitely more of a natural middleweight fighter. And obviously, Tito, despite being old like Chael, had been a little more active in the last few years than Tito, having fought more recently in September of 2015, obviously being Tito's last fight, you could say maybe really going for it. But in this fight, Chael is the more fresher of the two guys as far as fighting recently, as Vanderlei has not fought in 4 years. Now 40 years old, obviously, as a guy that's not a big 205-pound fighter, standing at just 5'10". Obviously has been in a lot of wars in his career, and obviously the big thing is Chael Sonnen obviously going to be looking to take Vanderlei down. Can Vanderlei stop the takedowns? And if he can, does he have enough left in him to get the knockout there of Chael Sonnen, and that's going to be the really deal. Is obviously I think Vanderlei is going to come out guns a-blazing. He's going to be all fired up, and I think if he can get to Chael early, that's going to be his best way to win. If he can't, I see probably a 15-minute decision by Chael Sonnen taking down Vanderlei repeatedly and punching him in the face, and that's really how this fight is going to go one or two ways. I don't think there's really any middle ground. Chael, I don't think we'll look to stand with Vanderlei at all. I think we'll shoot as soon as he gets that opportunity. And if Vanderlei can keep Chael Sonnen off long enough, I think he can get the knockout. But I think that's going to be very difficult, even at this stage or any stage of either fighter's career. I think it would be difficult for Vanderlei to keep Chael Sonnen off of him. So I think Chael Sonnen's going to be able to do it and get the victory there. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch, and I'm looking forward to this pay-per-view, and obviously Bellator 180 coming before. And once again, I am Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham, on Instagram at the Jim Graham. Beyond the Cage is on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. Like the page. Subscribe to us right here on YouTube, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage Podcast. Again, thank you to Michael Chandler for coming on the show. Really looking forward to watching this program here at pay-per-view coming on Bellator, for starting first on Spike TV for Bellator 180, and then, of course, moving to pay-per-view afterwards. And real quickly, I guess I'll do picks here for Bellator 180 and the Bellator pay-per-view here. Let's see, we have Heather Hardy will be taking on Alice Yeager. I'm going to go with Alice Yeager. I think Hardy, even though with the tremendous boxing background, I think taking on a girl who had, this will be your 10th professional fight, may have some trouble in the grappling situation. So I'm going to go with Alice Yeager to kind of pull the upset there over Heather Hardy. Dave Marfon against Neiman Gracie. I'm going to go with Gracie. I think he'll be able to get inside, get the takedown, work his submission game, and Marfon, solid competitor, but I think he's going to have a tough time with Gracie here in this matchup. Chinzo Machida against James Gallagher. I'm going to go with Machida. I think Gallagher is going to have a tough time getting this fight to the ground and dealing with the stand-up prowess of Chinzo. So I'm going to go with Chinzo Machida in this fight. Main event to Bellator 180, Phil Davis against Ryan Bader. I'm going to go Phil Davis. I think that he's progressed better in his game since the last two have fought, and I think it's hopefully going to be a little more entertaining, but I think we're going to see Phil Davis win this rematch here at Bellator 180. Aaron Pico will be taking on Zach Freeman. I'm going to go Zach Freeman, even though I think that Pico obviously certainly has a lot of skills and a lot of potential. I think Zach Freeman is a guy that has the more MMA experience, and I think may again play spoiler. I'm going with a lot of spoilers here, so I'm going to go with Zach Freeman to defeat Aaron Pico here to kick off the pay-per-view card. Michael Chandler against Brent Primus. Definitely picking Michael Chandler. I think Brent Primus is going to be in for a tough time against Michael Chandler. Douglas Lima against Lorenz Larkin. Gonna go Douglas Lima. I am a fan of Lorenz Larkin. I think he definitely has the skills to win this fight, but Douglas Lima is a guy that I think is very hard to prepare for, has a lot of power, and I don't think there are too many guys out there like Douglas Lima. And I think despite the UFC experience, and Lorenz Larkin, like I said, can certainly win this fight. I just like the physical prowess of Douglas Lima, and I'm going with the Phenom to win this one. Fedor Emelianenko against Matt Mitrione. I'm going to go with Fedor. Despite the age, I think that he's just simply the better fighter at any point in time in these two fighters' career, and so I'm going to go with the Russian to win this one. And as I mentioned, I think Chael Sonnen's going to get the victory there over Wanderlei Silva in the main event. I think his wrestling is going to be very difficult for Wanderlei to handle, a guy that already now is 40 years old and hasn't fought in 4 years. I think there's definitely going to be some ring rust, and I favor the takedowns of Chael Sonnen to win this one. I'd like to thank everybody who supports Beyond the Cage, MMA Warriors on Facebook, MMA UK, the MMA community, Gorilla the Bear, Adam Nelson. Again, amazing artwork. Check him out on Instagram at Gorilla the Bear and Twitter, and hit him up if you want to get some of your own custom art and check out some of his work as well. I would also like to thank Izzy Garcia, Flying Brian J., MMA Fight fans on Twitter, and everyone else that supports Beyond the Cage each and every... Top Rated MMA that supports Beyond the Cage each and every week. So, once again, I am Jim Graham, and thank you for listening to another edition here of Beyond the Cage.